Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Bolin, and I am a third-year student in the Global Leadership Program at NYU Washington, D.C. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We hope that you will use the Q&A feature that we have. Yes, we do check all the questions, so definitely let us know what you are thinking throughout the webinar. And now to introduce our esteemed panelists for today's discussion. Starting is Maria Hinojosa. She is the author of Once I Was You, a memoir of love and hate in a torn America. And she is the founder of Futuro Media, an independent nonprofit newsroom based in Harlem, New York City, with the mission to create multimedia content from the people of color perspective. And we also have AJ Mendez, who is the New York Times best-selling author of Crazy is My Superpower, co-founder of Scrappy Heart Productions, and former championship wrestler with the WWE. I am so excited to listen to the talk. Please tweet to us as well if you have Twitter. Our handle is at NYU Washington, D.C. So I'm going to toss it over to our panelists and enjoy today's discussion.
Thank you, Christina. She's so lovely. I appreciate you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm so honored and excited to talk to you about the memoir that I consider essential reading for every American, Once I Was You. Maria, thank you for allowing me to share this space with you and for writing this book. I am so fascinated by trailblazers and reading their stories. You know, these people who stand up for what is right, even if they're standing alone, people who speak up for people who cannot speak up for themselves or fight for themselves. And the first through uncharted territory, meeting resistance, getting bloody and bruised, just so the world is better for people who come after them. That is you to a T, Maria. You're a history maker, you're self-made, Renaissance woman. And an ass kicker, quite literally. I've seen your boxing videos on Instagram. You've written memoirs before. Why did the time feel right for you to tell this part of your story?
It's great to be here. Hello, NYU Washington, D.C. What's up, what's up, what's up? Hello, AJ. And thank you, Christina, for that. So I have to be very honest with you. Well, I kind of live in the space of honesty. I did not want to write another book. Writing a book is really scary. It's really, really scary. As a journalist, I'm dealing with, oh my God, you guys, I'm in Harlem. There's something going on. So you're going to hear some sirens. Sorry about that. It's real life. I'm in my bedroom studio. So stuff happens. So when you're a journalist like me, you're accustomed to deadlines that are somewhat quick turnaround. You know, so a long story might be something that you work on for 3 months, but a book is a long, long process. And I really didn't want to write another book, but I had this moment that kind of went viral on MSNBC in 2016 when I challenged Steve Cortez, who's actually from Chicago and is a Trump supporter, and he used the term illegals. He said something about the illegals, and I kind of was like, you know, you cannot use that term to refer to a human being. Illegal is not a noun. And that's the book that I thought I was going to write. I thought I was going to write a little pocket book that was going to explain in one easy airport trip, because we all used to live in airports, you know, and we'd get that little pocket book, be able to read it on one flight, that would explain why you should never use the term illegal when referring to a human being. But ultimately what ended up happening, AJ, is that you know, I had to get a new agent. Mine had retired, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they wanted a big book. They were like, we don't want a small book from you, Maria. We don't want something small. We actually want something big. And that's how I had to just kind of work through my fear and sit down and do this thing. And it was really scary. And now I'm really so thankful because people have connected with the book on a very, so thank you for your words, AJ. I really appreciate that.
Oh my, it's such a, I made it from the bottom of my heart. It's such a good book that everyone needs to read. I read it and I thought, okay, this is a story that, you know, to your point, that puts humanity at its center and puts faces to these statistics that other people might not think about. It does talk about it. is an immigration story, but it's a story about understanding and humanity and feminism and mental health and ultimately the American dream. So how do you feel when people possibly oversimplify and call it a book about immigration? Is that an oversimplification? Is that good because there's not enough people spotlighting the subject? How do you consider the
It's
book?
all of those things. You're exactly right. It's all, I mean, like, you know, it was driving me crazy because in the publishing world, you know, there are not many Latino and Latina authors. I mean, there are more of us, but still you kind of have to break through. Like there is a kind of perception that exists. And so I was like, it's not an immigrant book. But you're exactly right. I'm just really proud that it's the story of una inmigrante who's a proud Mexican, and it is about the process, and that I take on immigration in terms of policy in this country and the history. Because I don't know, there's like some false advertising going on when you've got the Statue of Liberty, who's kind of saying, hey, hi, come. And then actually they're like, no, but not you. Don't you come, which has been our history. Our history is not necessarily as pretty as the Statue of Liberty, just welcoming all. And so I'm proud to write that. We need to get that down on paper. People need to know that history. But you know, I'm essentially an American woman. And so you're right. There's like imposter syndrome, there's feminism, there's, you know, being a survivor of rape, there's you know, managing our sexuality as Latinas, as immigrants who are trying to become American women. There's, you know, the civil rights. There's, so thank you for asking the question, because I'm absolutely proud that it is a book that deals with immigration. But the point is that what we immigrants are saying is, we are you. You continue to want to put us off over here. We're actually you.
Yeah. And it's really, I mean, I've heard that phrase before, and I love it. It's really hard to hate up close, and I think that that's what your book does. Is it brings the experience up close, like your people, your family, or you're humans, and you not only do your journey, but you talk about like your father's journey and your mother's journey, and it's just so beautifully done, and all those themes are weaved together so gorgeously and seamlessly, and it was this like history lesson I really appreciated. Like I was learning without realizing I was learning, so I loved that. I know that the journey to getting a book published is often an uphill one, especially if you were kind of expecting to do a shorter book. What was that process like for you with your publishers, and was there any pushback or just rejection in general for the route you wanted to take this book?
Thank you so much, AJ. You know, this is something that I talk about a lot. Publicly, not many people have asked me, but when I'm with my students at Barnard, my alma mater where I teach now, I'm like, let me tell you about the process. And the process was that in my first round, after I decided that I would write a book, and after I had finally found an agent, it all takes quite a bit of time. And we wrote a 2-book proposal, and it got rejected everywhere except for one place. And people are just like, no, but you know, you're Maria Hinojosa. And I'm like, yeah, well, you know, not everybody really, first of all, I don't kind of walk around with whatever that is. I don't, I think you don't either, AJ. We're just like, we're trying to find our way in the world and, you know, put one foot in front of the other. But I'm very clear about talking about how yeah, there's a lot. That was really hard. Like it was, people were not saying we don't like you, we don't want to hear from you. They were like, we're not going to get that. We don't want that proposal. We don't want a 2-book proposal. We don't want that proposal. We don't want that small book. We want, and you know, I had to sit with that. So, you know, and then at one point, and I like to talk about the process a little bit because once we already had the book, my editor, who is Michelle Herrera Mulligan, Irish Mexican from Chicago, so you know she's a badass, and she was just like, look, you need an outline. And I was like, I'm a writer, I'm writing. And she was like, yes, you need an outline. It's like, but I'm a writer. Yeah, no, I needed an outline. And that was, I had to suffer through that. Just like, okay, what does this mean? What? And then it got really good. Then the outline really liberated me and allowed me to just go where the story. And in the end, AJ, I ended up writing an extra 100,000 words.
What? How does that happen?
I wasn't even, I was just writing. I had my personal editor. We were following the outline, but there was padding. And then thankfully, again, my editor was just like surgical. She got rid of an entire boyfriend, which was such a smart thing to do. Really smart, really smart.
Oh my gosh. So how did you did you enjoy the editor relationship? Because that could be extremely contentious as you're in it. But then like when you have some perspective, I often find that you're like, oh, this is so much better because they are clinical and precise, as you say. How is that relationship for you?
I remember at one point, crying with my husband, who's like my rock, the artist, Herman Perez, the artwork behind me. He's just so amazing. And I was like being, ooh, people tell me that they like what I do, but my editor is not liking what I do. I'm not used to, and he was just like, yeah. And sometimes you just have to be in that place and just like, cry it out. But you have a deadline, so you've got to get to work the next day. I'm like you, AJ. I think when you're in the middle of it, you just really want some light, and your editor is asking for something, and you're like, but and it's hard, but then in the end, you're like, thank God she was asking for this. Thank God she demanded the outline. Thankfully, she was able to go in and do that surgical removal. So I am very indebted to Michelle Herrera Mulligan, who is my editor from Simon & Schuster. And then in this process, I actually discovered my own personal editor, Katie Salisbury, who is Asian American, and is a writer and also works with writers to work on our outlines. And so now Katie is my editor. So before anybody sees anything, Katie sees it. And she's my writing partner as in my editor. She's my editor. And I'm so thankful because I always wanted that.
Mm-hmm.
And now I got it through this process where I was like creaming, I was screaming. I was like, no. And then out of it. And I think that is a really important lesson, especially for students, right? It's one of my favorite saying in Spanish, Mexican Spanish, no hay mal que por bien no venga, which is there is no bad from which good cannot come. And I know it can be really, really hard, but oftentimes it'll be just like, wow, if that hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened. Mm-hmm. And it ended up being a better situation for me.
I love that. I love that so much. And I think it's so necessary because sometimes authors and writers are so artists that like we don't have both sides. We don't have the left and the right side of our brain. Like we need someone that is more clinical and can kind of look at it from that sterile approach and help you with like the skeleton and the shape, and then you can put the art and the beauty into it and the color. But I did find that like in my experience, my editor pushed me in ways that at first I was uncomfortable with, and I thought, okay, I'm not ready to talk about that. But I was so grateful that I listened and followed through. But the experience in that exchange can be so uncomfortable. I think when I was speaking to your class, I had mentioned it feels like walking outside naked, and everyone's like, you're so brave for walking outside naked. But there are some stretch marks there, and then they just start like pointing stuff out. And it's like, that's what it feels like reading your editor's notes at first. But it's all worth it in the end, and I'm glad that you had an ultimately good experience. Was there any subject that your editor kind of pushed you that you needed that little extra nudge to include in the book?
I mean, I think the big nudge was around history. Which I love what you said, AJ, which is like, I felt like I was learning and I didn't even know I was learning. And I talk about it as like, there's a lot of spinach in this book, but it's like spinach when you go to an Italian restaurant, and it's like sauteed spinach with garlic and just a little bit of lemon, it's just like perfect, delicious, but it's spinach. So that part was hard for me. I struggled writing the history because I felt like it's not my history. I'm not an American. I'm not a historian. And then I was like, no, we have to write this. We as a Mexican immigrant, I have to write in my own words and reckon, for all of us to reckon with the fact that the first people who were physically excluded from coming to this country were Asian women. So when people are like, oh my God, anti-Asian hate, oh, this is, and it's like, this country wrote laws. Some of its first laws around issues of immigration had to do with the exclusion of Asian Chinese women, who they labeled as sex workers and said they can't come to this country because they're going to bring that bad stuff. And then it was the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s. So I needed to write that. And as I was writing that, this was a real moment when I was like, wow, I never realized that my history as a Mexican immigrant is tied to Asian women's history in this country. We are tied like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was like really, really liberating to me. And I'm very thankful that I was able to take the history and put it into my own words. That was the hardest part. And I cried when I wrote about the rape scene. I cried, and I had a lot of beautiful moments with my father. That was part of the best, was just like writing and just being like, híjole, papi, like, damn, papi, I put you through a lot, man. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, papi. You didn't deserve this. I'm so sorry. I was so sorry to be so oppositional, but also understanding why this needed to happen. And my father, who was like really, when you read the book, you'll see that he had these questions about this country. Can I trust this country? If this country is so anti-Black, doesn't it mean that they could also be anti-Mexican at any time? And it's like, yeah, papi, you were right. So that part was really, really beautiful.
Oh my gosh. Speaking of your father, you open the book talking about his experience, and you have this one story that it's such a gut punch of a story of him stopping at a bus stop bathroom and seeing two signs, and whites and colored. And I'm just going to read a little section that you wrote. You said, was he white or colored? And if he wasn't one or the other, did he even exist in this country? Whiteness became an unspoken privilege. We were not Americans, but if we kept our mouths shut, sometimes we might be able to pass. I had to put the book down when I read that. It's just like, it's a gut punch. And it's to think of your family going through this and to see how it's still, like, that was 1960, I think. And it's still so relevant today. How did your family feel with you talking about sharing their experiences such as that, sharing your own experiences? Was there stuff that they didn't know about? Were they afraid for you to tackle certain subjects? What was their reaction once this book was
right. So when you're writing something like this, I was not in touch with my family. I was not like, hey, do you remember? No, I was not, because I have to be very much centered in my own, kind of hypnotic space of remembering and being able to write. But I did have to sit down with them and talk about a few things. They didn't know about the rape. Like, they didn't really, and so then it was just like, wait, when, how, who, this, we found pictures of the guy who did this, it was just like a kind of like, but they have been incredibly supportive. I mean, that, I think, when my mom reads it, she's like, oh my God, I love it. To me, that's the best, right? When my mom loves it, when my mom is the one who's handing it out to other family members. Oh. It's adorable, her sister, mi tia Gloria, who shows up in the book, you know, I think tia Gloria may be pushing 90. She's quite Catholic, you know, and she read the book, and, you know, she wasn't able to say, because she couldn't say it, but she was just like, you know, y esa parte, you know, where you write about being assaulted. Like, I know that it was very hard for her to even say this, but we have to talk about these verdades, you know, that's my freedom. And I think my family recognizes that I have the capacity to do this. I mean, my husband is an extraordinary human being. He's really an extraordinary human being that he supports me in what I do and in the things that I reveal. And I think that that was one of the best blessings, was to find a man who is so centered in himself that he's like, yeah, you do you. I'm doing me. I'm doing my paintings. You do you. Let's, you know, like, let's rock and roll and support each other. And so Herman has never been stifling at all. But I think as a writer, you have to, and I got this from Denise Chavez, the author from New Mexico, who I love and adore. And she was just like, when you're writing about your family or anything, you cannot be in that space of, once you're done, you have to be prepared to talk about certain things, but you're a writer, and it's a delicate issue.
And did you feel a sense of healing, like as if putting these words out into the world, they were no longer yours to carry alone? Did you feel like it was, you know, therapeutic in any way?
Thank you for asking. Nobody's asked that question, AJ. Yeah, definitely. I mean, but it wasn't just healing and therapeutic in terms of, you know, my own experience as a young woman growing up in this country and navigating identity. It was also trying to make peace with this country.
Mm.
Like, you know, this country, because this country is us, right? And that's part of the message of the book, is like, it's not going to change because other people decide to do something on this issue. It's when we're going to do this together. So that part of it was really important to me, to hold this country accountable. And we need to do that. That's part of our responsibility. And so I'm really thankful that that's something that is being communicated through the book.
Definitely. And to touch on what you talked about with your husband, um, I feel like a lot of people don't consider how time intensive writing a book is and how important the relationships around you are to, in a way, like giving you that freedom to soar and fly or disappear for hours as you're writing a book. When I wrote my book, I had just retired from wrestling, and I was home doing nothing, like eating Pop-Tarts on the couch. Like I had nothing but time. You have like 20 jobs, like you run your own company, you're a journalist and a host, and you're the boss, you're a professor. How, and not to mention you're a wife and a mother. How did you fit writing a book into that puzzle? And was it like a year? Was it like, what was that experience like for you?
So thank you again for asking. I love this because I love kind of getting into the technicality. So the moment when I had decided that I wanted to write something, before I had an agent, I don't think I had an agent. And I remember Herman and I, my husband and I, were like getting ready to go to the Dominican Republic, because, you know, when I arrived in the DR was when I was going to start writing my book. And then a snowstorm came and our flight was delayed for like two days, maybe. And so my husband kind of looked at me and he was like, so you're not going to write because you're not in the Caribbean? And I was like, oh God, he really just, you know, called me on this. And so I'm looking at my bed right now because I'm in my bedroom studio. And so I just took the computer, I propped it up on the side of the bed and I started writing. I was like, he's right. Like, I can't wait for the perfect space. Once I had done all of the work, which is, you know, meeting agents, trying to choose, which is very, you know, just setting up meetings, et cetera, which takes a long process. And throughout that, I was writing here and there. just kind of memory, really, not really sure what I was writing. But once I had an agent and an assignment, then I became pretty strict and I took the mornings off. So in the office, what would happen is my day would start basically like at 2:00. And then once I had kind of got a rhythm into that, then I left the office entirely and I took off. I have to actually go back and think about how many months it was. If it was 3 months where I literally took off and I was in the DR, and this was pre-virtual life. So I really was just writing every single day for like 2.5, 3 months. And that's how I was able to do it. Right now, it's not public yet, so don't tweet this out. Do not tweet this out, but I'm finishing the young adult version of Once I Was You. It's about to be announced. Yeah. We're just signing the contract and you know how that goes, AJ. So right now, what I did for that book was that we used some of the material that we had left over. We created más o menos an outline, me and Katie. And then the first week of January, I shut down and I started writing every day. The same thing. I didn't go into the office. My days would start at like 2 or 3 o'clock. I was doing minimum January, February. And then we spent March editing, and now we're going to get ready to hand it in. So I just told my team, actually, I just told the staff, I was like, I'm letting you know sometime, like maybe in the next 2 months, I'm going to need to take off another 3 weeks, let's say 2 to 3 weeks, where again, I'm going to compartmentalize and I'm going to work on finishing the book, the young adult book. I work on the weekends. So right now I'm doing the editing on the weekends. So, and that's just the way it goes. And I'm, the next writing project, which I know what I want to write. But it will be the same thing. I'm very lucky that I'm able to just walk away from the office because things run, and they give me the support to do something like this project. So thankfully I figured it out. Also, when you get older, you realize that you don't really have time to waste.
I love that. Yeah.
So what that means is like, you're like, okay, well, I got to write today. I don't know how I'm feeling. I don't know if I'm inspired. I don't know if whatever, but I have to write today. And when I'm writing like that, I'm writing every day. There's no day off.
I love that. Oh my gosh. I can't even I would love to see what the minutes of your day look like.
I'll share them with you.
That's really impressive. I'm so excited that there's a young readers version coming out because I like I said, I think everybody needs to read it. Especially because one of the major themes in this memoir is identity. And that's something that we start struggling with or asking questions about very young, no matter your race. It's something that I think we can all understand that search for, but specifically for the Latinx community, it's such a complicated issue. We don't get to see ourselves represented in mainstream media enough, and that adds to this feeling of invisibility and this lack of belonging. And then we're expected to either assimilate in a way that's palatable and non-threatening, or exemplify this cartoonish stereotype of the culture that is easily understandable for people. You talk about this a lot, this struggle with dual identity throughout your childhood and your adolescence, and beginning with your looking for representation on TV and thinking you found it in West Side Story, but it's a white girl in brown face. And then going to school in a predominantly white school and feeling imposter syndrome and feeling you had to hide your Mexicanness. And then, an ex-boyfriend saying you're not Mexican enough, or a director saying you're not white enough. Can you talk about how you coped with having one foot in each culture and how you found your identity seemingly so early on while being pulled in these two different directions?
My parents were little geniuses. I think that authentically something in them spoke to them and said, now that you've left Mexico, which they were never supposed to do, but now that you have, Mexico is going to become truly your homeland. And so my parents fell in love with their homeland from afar. And that's why we would drive. There were these drives that would happen every year, 5 days of driving to get to Mexico, and then driving throughout Mexico and going to places where my own family in Mexico was like, what do you mean you're going to go to the pyramids in Yucatan and Chichen Itza? Like, what are you talking about? Or you're going to drive to Oaxaca and go, climb Monte Alban. Like, there are gorillas, as in leftist gorillas, it's scary, and so my parents we had a visual. It was 100% sensory experience of being in our homeland. Entonces, when I would come back, I was always like, well, okay, what's kind of like, where am I? But I knew that there was this place that I was from that was like, that left, frankly, the pilgrims in the dust. I had never said it that way, but I kind of like it. I kind of feel like I want to write that. Like, I really did. Like, I was like, oh, wait, these people, wait, Teotihuacan was here before no, the pilgrims, we should have been teaching you. So I think that gave me a real profound sense of rootedness. But it was really hard. I also think that, we were kind of the beneficiaries of, even though we were in Hyde Park, which was a very black-white binary dynamic in terms of race, but people in our community were like, Mexicans, cool. Mm-hmm. It was like, Mexicans, yeah. In general, even though my ex-boyfriend, pobrecito, he was like, and I think he meant well. I think what he was trying to say to me was, no, but you are an American. Mm-hmm. You are. And I was like, I appreciate that he's trying to tell me that, but he was erasing me, his inability to say, no, okay, you really are Mexican because you have a Mexican passport. Mm-hmm. Was hard for me. So I want to write about this. I want to talk about this. And what's totally freaky to me, AJ, is that, I have students who are still battling these same kinds. Sometimes I'm like, it's actually worse, right? Because now you have an image on the media of children from our countries coming, and as if there's some kind of a plague, some kind of a horde. Mm-hmm. So now it's not that they just feel invisible. It's that actually they have to fight back a narrative that has been created about them. Yep. I mean, Adam Toledo in the city of Chicago, 13 years old. Ultimately, his death is, he had to fight back on an image that it had him against a wall. Mm-hmm. 13 already, a murder. And it's like, he was 13. Like, you told him to drop the gun. Like, he dropped the gun. Do you know what a 13-year-old is? Like, a 13-year-old, like, they're stupid, honestly. That's what the whole brain research shows, is that adolescence is just like when you're a toddler. And we know toddlers are like, oh, I think I'll put my finger in that fire. Oh, whoops, I guess I shouldn't have done that. Or I think I'll walk off the seesaw and I'm going to. So that's what worries me now, is that now we have to deconstruct an image that we didn't have anything to do in constructing. And
you say, I'm going to butcher this. I have it written down on a different piece of paper. You have a quote that was, at first we were invisible and now we were seen as animals. And that's kind of, that is what this messaging is right now. And I completely agree. It's so hard to break from that. To dive into that a little bit, when I spoke to you earlier at your class, we were talking about the children in detention centers, and we were talking about what are the long-term mental health effects for them. And so I was really curious if there was any research into this. And so I did some digging around, and it looks like since 2009, there's only been about like 26 studies about long-term mental health effects of detention. I'm not sure if 26 is a lot or a little, but since 2009, that's what we're working with. And they all very much reached the same conclusion about, for adults and children, that there's just a very clear higher risk for PTSD and depression and mental health related disability and suicidal ideation. Longer stays in detention lead to more severe symptoms. There's even like psychosis, which is normally associated with prolonged abuse, which kind of says everything that needs to say. And all of the children that were, there's not a lot of research on children. There's maybe about 400 to 600 children that were in all these tests sampled. But every single child evidenced at least one psychiatric disorder. That's terrifying. From when you went to your first, visited your first detention center, I believe in 1986 in Corpus Christi, what has changed? Has anything changed? Has anything gotten better? Has it gotten worse?
In 1986 in Harlingen, Texas, I went to visit a detention camp that was nicknamed El Corralón. El Corralón is a corral for cows and cattle. And that's what it was named. So it was people in orange jumpsuits in the hot sun with nothing to do in the pasture, basically. So, you know, now when you arrive as a refugee asking for asylum or as a migrant, they put you inside something known as la hielera, the icebox. And they do that. I believe it is a form of torture that leaves no marks. And then after la hielera, the icebox, they put you in la perrera, which is the dog cage. These are all terms that if you ask any migrant, refugee, they will say, oh, yes, sure. So we have an entire sector of the population that understands these terms while a whole other part of the population is out having brunch.
Mm-hmm.
So it's gotten worse in that the sophistication of the terror and the abuse is such that it doesn't leave a mark. Before, I guess, you know, they would get sunburned. There was a mark, you know, now it's like, where is it physically? The psychological torture that I have heard of, which is happening right now as we speak, where women were being woken up every hour. That's torture. Sleep deprivation is torture. They were being threatened with their children being taken away from them. They were being teased, not teased, but threatened. Like they would take away a child, pretend like they're not going to give him back, you know, use it as a tool to threaten all the, like, horrible. So I think about this, you know, and I think about the people who survived. Hold on, my dog. Hold on.
Aww. We were just
Walter.
about dogs, so we jinxed it.
Walter wants to get on the bed. And
Hi,
he's
Walter.
like, I need to get on the bed. All right, Walter's on the bed. So I've thought about this recently, you know, just like, well, it was recently Holocaust Survivor Day. And so I thought about people who survived the Holocaust, people who survived being in a place like Auschwitz. You know, how did they make it? You know, and this is what the brain experts say. You were talking about neuro science and its impact on the brain and trauma. And here's what they basically say for children, like who have experienced this kind of trauma, where there is an incapacity to do fight or flight, right? Where you are stuck. Something is released in the brain. I don't know what it's called. Let's just say it's released in the brain. It's like toothpaste and it doesn't disappear. It's released in the brain to help you cope with the trauma of not having fight or flight, not being able, it doesn't go away. So it's there forever. And I asked the neuroscientist, I was like, so what does that look like? She was like, well, you take two kids, both of them suffer an amputated arm for whatever reason. One kid gets over the amputated arm, is just like gets a prosthesis and is just like, becomes a football player. And it's like, and the other kid can't get out of the thing of the lost arm.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're talking about. Some of these kids will be able to bounce back. It probably means never addressing or talking about the trauma at all, just like pretending like it never happened. And other kids, it will be, this is my greatest fear, is, what I want Biden to do is to offer unlimited free mental health to anybody who has been had anything to do with ICE or Border Patrol. Free, unlimited mental health services. You're killing two birds with one stone. You're offering employment to many young Latinos and Latinas and people of color who want to work in social work, who want to give back, who want to do something to help. And also you're helping our new arrivals who aren't going anywhere, so that they don't become psychopaths and take out their anger and rage, which is legit. They've been tortured by our government.
Mm-hmm. And there's
and money has been made off of their backs for private prison companies. So we have to acknowledge we would all be traumatized if we had to go through that.
Yep. Especially as children, everyone that's there, but especially as children, like you were saying, that's toxic stress. And there's physiological changes that you can't argue with the science. Like that literally the architecture of the brain changes from trauma that is not mitigated, that is prolonged and not mitigated. There will be physical symptoms. There will be changes in their metabolism and immune system and their learning and development. And it's really heartbreaking to talk about mental health as a whole. Like for our community, like I appreciated so much that you talked about your journey. And you did it in a way that was very understandable and relatable. And you really eased into it because you didn't have the words as a child to explain the anxiety that you were feeling from a young age. Our community in general has so many barriers to treatment. Just like to go off a tangent and just kind of point this out a little bit, we have those cultural differences where, like you say, the men in your family didn't cry, or asking for help outside of the family is an acceptable behavior. There's socioeconomic disparities. There's structural racism in medicine that leads to this substantiated mistrust. There's healthcare disparities where, we can't get quality care, or there's insurance limitations. And even if a person of color goes through all these barriers and they make it into therapy, there's such a lack of representation in providers. They often don't speak the language. They don't understand the culture, the norms, the values, and all the way peeling the onion back, we're not even represented in clinical trials and research. So there's so many reasons why we're kind of shorted when it comes to mental health care. So I thank you for talking about this and talking about how you started as a child with anxiety and it took you into adulthood to embrace therapy. Can you talk about that journey and when you found the words, and how your family maybe feels about that now?
So the biggest trauma that my family experienced in terms of our arrival and integration into this country happens when my father, there was a lot around my sister who was older and very pretty and dating boys, in the 1970s. Like that was a big issue. But then to build on that, when my mom decides that she wants to work outside of the home, basically the patriarchal structure is challenged and it almost breaks our family. And my mom and dad really loved each other, didn't want to separate, but this was destroying the family unit as my father perceived it. And my mother went into therapy alone and then brought my father along, who said yes. Granted, we had a Russian immigrant therapist who understood dynamics of incorporating into a new country And so my father felt heard and acknowledged, as opposed to he's just the angry, quiet Mexican man. And that's when we first did family therapy. So that was pretty early. I'm trying to think. So I think I was still in grade school to be doing family therapy, drawing, doing some like, what are the memories that you have? And so therapy actually became not something I did in high school at all, when I was going through panic attacks and anxiety attacks and not knowing what the heck was going on. Other people were seeing therapists, but that was for the rich kids.
Mhm.
I mean, that's what it was, for the rich kids. And then I started doing therapy pretty consistently. Once I had a job, like in the 1980, like when I graduated from college. I didn't do therapy through college, so really throughout. But then I started doing therapy pretty consistently. And I miss my therapist. I haven't done therapy in about 5 months for myself, but I do therapy right now with my daughter. She and I are doing mother-daughter sessions. We're working some stuff out.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, we do mother-daughter sessions. I brought my mom, I flew my mom in from Chicago to do sessions like 3 or 4 years ago. So I am a big proponent of therapy, but I do know that it's hard to find one that really clicks for you. And I've been incredibly lucky to have 2 really extraordinary therapists who have carried me through. One Afro-Puerto Rican and the other one white Argentinian refugee. And both of them have just been an essential part of my life.
That's an important message, is that it's kind of like dating. Like sometimes you have to figure out which therapist works for you and fit and clicks with you. It might not be the first one. And a lot of people get discouraged. Like they need to just keep trying, like date around a little bit till you find the one that you feel comfortable committing to.
But look, I just want to say this is really important, AJ, that you and I talk in this way, because we have to remember there are many people who have never been to a therapist who still are like, and just like, no, just try it. Like, see, like, I think it's just the way also that I'm talking increasingly about the vaccine, which is, yeah, you just kind of got to do this, so I'm really thankful that we have this conversation, because it's tough times if you're a person of color in the United States of America.
Very true. And I agree with you. Like in my family, it was a luxury item for white people. Like that's what my family thought. It was like, oh, you don't have problems. You have to invent them and talk to somebody and pay money like it was
Se lo inventan. Ellos van y se lo inventan. It's so true.
like, just put some Vicks on your face and take a nap. You're fine. Like it was just so ridiculous. But now we realize how important it is. And so I think it's so important. I agree with you so much. It's important to have
put some Vicks on your face and just take a nap.
Oh my gosh. So let me jump in and see some of this Q&A. There is one question which also matches one of the questions I wanted to ask you. You became this voice for the voiceless, and there was time when you were trying to find your spot at other people's tables until you just said, screw it, I'm gonna just make my own damn table, and like you were the boss, you were your own boss. It's so amazing and admirable. So someone asks, how would you characterize your transition from business reporting to where you are now? And how are you feeling self-sufficient and self-satisfaction from doing all of that yourself?
I am so glad that I was able to walk away from CNN, for example, which I love my time there. I'm so glad that, I was really scared at that time. I talk about the golden handcuffs because, it was a nice salary, with benefits, but there was a lack of journalistic freedom. And when that ended, I was able to learn how to understand how to raise money to do journalism, which was a really important part of the conversation. And I wouldn't have been able to learn that if I had stayed at CNN the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
When I decided to form Futuro, it's really out of desperation. It was exactly 11 years ago in April of 2010 when we launched. I was terrified. I had two people who were working with me, you know, one who was working on the business side and the other person who was helping me decide editorially. And I asked someone for money. Like I asked a philanthropist straight up. I was like, I need like, I mean, I had learned how to do it, but basically I was like, you know, it's a nonprofit. I need your donation so we can get up and running. I was terrified. If people said, oh, you're a media entrepreneur, I was like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm I don't know. I'm just doing this, you know. Now, 11 years in, olvídate. I am so thankful I took that risk, that I was able to have people around me. By the way, they're not around me. Those original people ended up not being the best people for me to work with. And so that happens. And that was really scary. But yeah, now we're growing. You know, people laughed at me, AJ. They were like, why are you creating a nonprofit media company? Why don't you create something that's going to make money? And I was like, because that's not why I do what I do. I actually don't want to make money off of doing journalism. People were like, why do you want to do audio? Nobody's going to listen to the radio in, a year. Well, nobody knew that podcasts were going to become the next big thing, right? So there was a lot of doubt. So much worry, so much worry, payroll worries. And now we're kind of established. So I have to go back and remind myself, right? Like, no, you actually knew what you were doing then, because now things are coming up, right? Projects are coming up, things are coming up, and I'm having to trust my gut again. Like, well, what's the story? We had an editorial meeting yesterday, and I was like, well, I think it's this. And I'm like, that's the story. Trust your gut. Remember, you know what you're doing. So all I guess I'm trying to say is that as women who are in this business, there is a lot of self-determination that we're just kind of like, unstoppable, working every day. But also, you have to really believe in yourself.
Mhm.
And so, heck yes, now I'm not just a media entrepreneur. I'm running a company that is being talked about in the trades. I'm running a company that is now being looked at as like, how did they do what they just did? Like, how did they drop all of those podcasts that are all like the bomb? How did they do what comes next? So now I do feel really solid. Like, I'm not worried. I'm just not worried. But there were 10 years of ridiculous amounts of worry.
Of just building it from the ground up. I can't even
Building
imagine.
build the plane as it's flying. Just like, okay, let's every day.
Oh my God, what a great way to put that. I just started a company, so I'm like that. That's a great way to put it, and terrifying. But you are an inspiration that I look up to. So thank you for giving me hope. This is a great question. Are there journalists, authors, and or creatives that inform your writing craft? What is your perspective on the current representation of journalists of color in the field today? So two-part question.
So in the immediate, the person who probably has impacted my craft the most has been Sandra Cisneros, who's a friend of mine and who is kind of like a muse for me. Also Latina from Chicago. She was just really important in helping me to feel like I could own this narrative voice, and to kind of give me the capacity to just be in that voice and own it. And that's really important as a writer. In terms of Once I Was You, I was very impacted by the work of Sarah Smarsh, who wrote the book Heartland. The subtitle is like Growing Up Poor in the Richest Country in the World, where she did a lot of personal revelation along with historical and policy stuff. And then as writers, who's right now, I'm reading Chiara Alegria Hudis, who just wrote a book, My Broken Language. Is that what it's called? Here it is. Yeah. My Broken Language. So she's she's the screenwriter of the movie In the Heights and the play In the Heights with Lin-Manuel Miranda. And I'm really loving her way of writing, which is incredibly poetic. I'm more Ernest Hemingway. You know, and I just love the fact that we can have these two different styles of writing and still be kind of talking about similar experiences around identity and being Latinas in this country. In terms of journalists, you know, I mean, I'm really, really happy that Joyanne Reed is on MSNBC consistently in prime time as a Black woman. So I'm applauding that, but I'm horrified every day that passes when I don't see a Latino or Latina commentator or anchor on the air. It's really disheartening, because what it means is that we are being invisibilized, like that thing that my father worried about. You know, if there's a door for white and there's a door for colored, you know, where do I exist? And does that mean that I exist as a Mexican man? You know, and I feel like right now, when Latinos and Latinas are the second largest voting bloc in the United States, when we're the second largest non-white group in the United States, that how we think and feel about everything that's happening in this country is important. So, you know, I woke up this morning. My husband is actually watching One Day at a Time, the reboot. So if you've never watched it, please do. And I'm really enjoying watching him watch it, because of course I watched it from the very beginning. And I asked myself, I said this last night at an event that I did in Texas virtually. I said, how is it possible that One Day at a Time doesn't exist on a network? Es que un programa that is like so beautiful, so perfect, so well written, so well acted, like talking about how is it possible that it doesn't have a spot? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't. And I feel like we're all being gaslit in a lot of ways. So the flip side of that is get ready for In the Heights, the movie that's dropping in June. And never give up on your dreams, because, you know, I always wanted to be an actress, and I'm in the movie. I have a role. I have a speaking role. Small,
oh my God.
but I have a speaking. It's not a cameo.
So that is your like 21st of 20 jobs. You have actress as well. Oh, sorry. There we go. Yeah, that's just another job.
Oh, can't hear you. Why?
Oh no.
What happened? I don't know. It's like you muted your microphone.
I feel as I'm.
All right, try there. No, try the other one.
Oh no.
Oh, I don't know. Are you hearing her, Christina? Maybe it's just me, but I don't.
I'm hearing her.
Oh, okay.
Like she can hear the book. Oh, so I can't hear you.
Oh no.
Whoa.
It's kind of important that
All right, maybe. Okay, here. Let me take off my.
Mom can hear both of us.
Yikes. Bluetooth. Let me turn it off.
We were doing so well.
Okay, talk to me.
Can you hear me now?
All right, let me go get my assistant. Hold on. Let me go get my assistant.
We were like a minute from the end here, and
they can hear me, but I can't hear them.
Oh no.
And I'm not muted. And
your headphones disconnected because they're probably connected to your.
Well,
okay.
Christina, are you able to
AJ, say something? No.
Maria?
No.
Just give it a second.
Okay, say something.
Mom, please give it a second.
I can hear both.
Okay. That last question is great. The advice for Latinx journalists. Are you able to? Oh, you can hear me now? Yay! Okay, let's wrap it up with this question from the Q&A. What advice do you have for Latinx journalists who are trying to bring up Latinx issues to mostly white newsroom?
So I'm just, because we don't have a whole lot of time, so I'm just going to be quick and dirty. Okay. There are a lot of ways that you can approach this, right? Multiple ways, but since we don't have time, and basically what I'm doing now is that it's essentially comes down to a numbers and business argument. So what you have to say is, editor, Do you understand demographics in the United States? And you're going to say this nicely, right? You're going to do it. Do you understand demographics? Do you understand that Latinos and Latinas are the second largest voting bloc in the United States? That the future of democracy essentially rests on their shoulders and their incorporation into democracy. Do you understand that Asians and Latinos are the fastest growing demographic groups in the United States? Do you want to have a market for your product? This newspaper, this television news program? Well, if you do, you don't have a future unless you're reporting on these communities. And then I go further because you know me, AJ, and I'm just like, if you're not covering Latinos and Latinos, there's no way that you're practicing excellence in journalism. Period. You are not practicing excellence in journalism. So you kind of have to go around it in many ways, and you're going to encounter roadblocks. So don't give up, but try to come with data. Latinas are the most powerful consumer group in the United States of America. We actually determine products that are bought we over index over Black and white women in terms of choosing the products that are consumed in our home. So we have a lot of power. Use that when you're going in to have that conversation with the editor. But also, it's the long fight too. Okay, so please don't just walk away. Try, if you can, to not give up, because we need you. We need you in the business, and ultimately maybe you end up running your own thing like AJ, but we need you in the business. So please try your best to we need journalists, we need writers, we need creators, we need people who are telling our stories. So please don't give up.
I love that so much. I love that. Like if there's not a space for you, you are the example. You can create it yourself. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for this book. I cannot wait to read anything you write after. I will devour it. Thank you, Christina and Tom and NYU. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It was a pleasure, Maria.
Love talking to you. Let's get into the ring one day soon, okay?
I'm so scared of you.
If you guys want to see that, then let us know, because I just think it would be adorable.
Oh my
for
God.
me and AJ to be in the, I just think it would be so cute. We'd have so much fun.
Oh my God, you would kick my ass, but I'm down. I'm down.
I love you. Thank you for all you do. And thank you to NYU and to everybody involved and to all the students. Don't give up.